My name is Loretta. I am 68 years old, and my occupation is a retired high school principal. For months, my own son and his wife sat across from me at Sunday dinners, treating me like a helpless child, while they secretly drained the life savings I worked 4 decades to build. They mistook my quiet nods for senility and my silence for defeat. They truly believed I was just a fragile old woman who would quietly fade away into a cheap nursing home. But they had no idea that their smug, entitled faces would soon turn ghost white when the bank teller revealed I had already pulled the rug right out from under them and taken absolutely everything they thought they owned. It was a typical Sunday afternoon, the kind where the smell of roasted chicken and collard greens used to bring nothing but warmth to my home. But lately these dinners felt more like a poorly acted stage play. DeAndre the son, I raised all by myself with blood, sweat, and endless prayers, sat across my mahogany dining table looking at his phone. Beside him sat his wife Chloe. She is a white American woman who always wears a polite, painted-on smile that never quite reaches her cold blue eyes. I watched quietly as Chloe leaned over my plate. She picked up a knife and fork and started cutting my chicken into tiny, bite-sized pieces as if I were a toddler. She spoke to me in that loud, slow, exaggerated voice people use when they assume your brain has stopped working. "Now, Loretta," she chimed, enunciating every single syllable. "Make sure you chew slowly. We do not want you choking today. Do you understand me?" I looked at her, keeping my face perfectly blank. I have 2 master degrees. I ran a high school of 2,000 rowdy teenagers for 20 years. Yet here I was being spoon-fed by a woman who maxed out 3 credit cards, trying to buy a lifestyle she could not afford. I turned to my son and asked a perfectly coherent question about his recent promotion at his firm. Instead of answering, DeAndre just sighed heavily, rolled his eyes at Chloe, and muttered that I probably would not understand the corporate details anyway. I simply nodded and took a small sip of my sweet tea. Let them roll their eyes. Let them treat me like a burden. It took every ounce of strength in my tired bones not to reach across that table and wipe the sheer disrespect right off both of their faces. But I knew better. I knew exactly what they were doing behind my back. They thought I was completely oblivious to the missing bank statements and the forged signatures on my mail. They really believed my mind was slipping away day by day, making it easier for them to swoop in and take control of the wealth I had quietly accumulated over a lifetime. They wanted to strip me of my dignity, throw me into a facility, and live high on my dime. What DeAndre and Chloe did not realize was that my fragile, forgetful act was nothing more than a carefully crafted performance. I was playing the fool to catch the thieves. While they spent their evenings browsing luxury car catalogs with my stolen money, I was spending my days preparing a financial ambush so devastating they would never recover. I watched them laugh together at the table, clinking their glasses of wine, totally unaware that the trap had already been set. They thought they were playing a game of checkers with a helpless old lady, but I have been playing chess my entire life, and it was almost time to say checkmate. My husband Calvin passed away from a sudden and devastating aneurysm when DeAndre was only 5 years old. I remember standing in that sterile hospital hallway with a little boy holding my hand, asking when his daddy was coming home. In that single moment, my entire world was ripped apart, but I made a silent vow to my husband and to my God that our son would never lack for anything. I was just a middle school science teacher back then, bringing home a paycheck that barely covered the mortgage and the groceries. But a mother's love is a powerful engine. I took on evening shifts, tutoring students, and spent my weekends grading papers and organizing community drives. Eventually, I worked my way up the ladder to become a high school principal. I poured every ounce of my energy into giving DeAndre the life Calvin and I had dreamed of for him. I stretched every dollar until it screamed. I wore the same 3 sensible suits to church and work year after year. I drove a beat-up sedan that rattled when I hit 50 miles an hour. I clipped coupons, cooked all our meals from scratch, and taught my son the value of a hard-earned dollar. My ultimate goal was to see DeAndre walk across that university graduation stage without a single dime of student loan debt anchoring him down. And by the grace of God, he did. I handed him a completely debt-free start to his adult life. But what the neighborhood did not know, what my church family did not know, and what even DeAndre did not know, was that behind my modest lifestyle, I was building an empire. When Calvin passed, he left a modest life insurance policy. Instead of spending it to make our grief a little more comfortable, I took classes on wealth management. I stayed up late into the night at my kitchen table with a calculator and a notepad, studying market trends and real estate investments. Over 4 decades, I quietly poured my savings into municipal bonds, blue-chip stocks, and commercial real estate trusts. I even bought out a small strip mall on the other side of town under a blind holding company. I never cared for flashy jewelry or designer handbags to prove my worth. My wealth was a silent, invisible fortress. I built brick by brick to guarantee that no matter what happened, my family would always be secure. I raised a respectful, educated, and grounded young man. Or at least that was the comforting lie I told myself for a very long time. The boy I raised began to fade away the moment he put a diamond ring on Chloe. Chloe is a white American woman who walked into my son's life with champagne tastes and a tap water income. From the very beginning, I could see that her appetite for luxury far outweighed her willingness to work for it. DeAndre was doing well for himself at his corporate job, but well enough is never enough for a woman who values image over substance. Almost overnight, my son transformed. The young man who used to spend his Saturday mornings helping me weed the tomato garden started leasing expensive European sports cars and wearing custom-tailored suits that cost more than my first mortgage. Chloe systematically began to build a wall between my son and the traditional values I had instilled in him. She replaced humility with a breathtaking sense of entitlement. She convinced him that they deserved the absolute best of everything right now, without putting in the decades of sweat equity required to actually afford it. And then the subtle disrespect toward me began to creep in. It started small, so small that if I complained, I would look like a bitter old mother-in-law. Our traditional Sunday dinners after church slowly stopped happening because Chloe claimed they were just too exhausted from their busy social lives. One Thanksgiving, the holiday I had hosted in my home for 30 years, was suddenly moved to their new, excessively large house. Somehow my invitation magically got lost in the mail until the morning of the holiday, when DeAndre called me with a rushed afterthought apology. When they did bother to visit me, Chloe treated my home like a dusty museum. She was being forced to tour. She would refuse to sit on my floral sofa, claiming the fabric triggered her allergies. She would run a manicured finger over my wooden countertops and suggest with a tight, patronizing smile that it was a shame I lived in such a cramped, dated environment. She would tell DeAndre right in front of my face that I deserved to be in a place more suited for someone of my advanced years. But the most insidious part was how she began to attack my mind. Chloe started planting little seeds of doubt about my health. If I misplaced my reading glasses for a moment, she would gasp dramatically and ask DeAndre if they needed to schedule an appointment with a neurologist. If I repeated a story about my teaching days, she would reach out, pat my hand with sickeningly fake pity, and share a knowing, sorrowful look with my son. She was actively painting a picture of me as a fragile, fading woman whose mind was rapidly deteriorating. And the most heartbreaking part of it all was that DeAndre simply nodded along. The son I had sacrificed my youth, my sleep, and my dreams for was standing by and allowing his wife to lay the groundwork to erase me. He had become completely brainwashed by a woman who looked at my simple life and saw only a nuisance, but looked at my bank accounts and saw a massive, unearned payday. They truly thought they had me backed into a corner of my own mind. They were dead wrong. I have always been a woman of strict routine and unbreakable order. You simply do not manage a high school of 2,000 chaotic teenagers and a staff of 50 teachers for 2 decades without learning how to keep impeccable, meticulous records. Every single piece of paper in my life had a designated place. Every Tuesday afternoon, like clockwork, my bank statements and investment reports arrived in my mailbox. I would sit at my small kitchen table, put on my reading glasses, pull out a red pen, and review every single transaction down to the very last penny. But right around the middle of October, those crisp white envelopes abruptly stopped showing up. At first, I thought it was just a minor delay at the local post office. A week passed, and then 2 weeks went by with an empty mailbox. When I finally walked down to the postal branch to inquire, the clerk looked at her computer screen and told me that a change of address form had been officially filed for all my financial correspondence. All my sensitive mail was being forwarded to my son's address. I was completely baffled and disturbed because I had filled out no such form. That following Sunday, when DeAndre came by the house to pick up his dry cleaning, I casually brought it up. I was standing at the stove, slowly stirring a pot of collard greens, when I asked him if he knew anything about my missing mail and the sudden change of address. He froze for just a fraction of a second. It was a tiny, fleeting micro-expression, but a mother always knows her child. He quickly recovered and let out a loud, dramatic sigh. He walked over, placed a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder, and looked at me with those eyes full of fabricated pity. "Mum, you are probably just misplacing things again," he said, his voice dripping with heavy condescension. "You know how your memory has been slipping lately. You probably threw the statements away with the grocery store flyers and just forgot about it. Then you probably got confused at the post office." I stood there looking at the boy I gave my entire youth to. My memory was sharp as a tack. I could still recite the names and graduation years of students I taught 30 years ago. But DeAndre looked me right in my face and tried to convince me that my own mind was actively failing me. He tried to gaslight the very woman who stayed up countless nights, teaching him how to read and write. I felt a tight knot form in my chest, but I did not argue with him. I swallowed my pride and just nodded slowly, playing the part of the confused, declining senior citizen he desperately wanted me to be. "Oh, maybe you are right," I murmured, looking down at my worn hands. "Maybe I am just getting old and clumsy with my chores." He smiled a sickeningly triumphant smile and kissed my cheek. "Do not worry, Mum," he told me, puffing out his chest. "Chloe and I are going to take over paying your bills and managing the mail, so you do not have to stress your tired brain anymore." As he walked out of my kitchen, I felt a cold, sharp chill wash over my entire body. My son was not trying to help me or protect me. He was actively trying to build a false narrative. He was deliberately setting the stage to make me look completely incompetent to the rest of the world. The undeniable, horrific truth hit me like a runaway freight train exactly 4 days later. It was a gloomy, rainy Thursday afternoon. I had spent the morning baking a sweet potato pie from scratch, the exact kind DeAndre used to beg for when he was a little boy trying to earn good grades. I drove my old rattling sedan over to their massive, echoing house in the upscale suburbs to drop it off as a surprise. I let myself in with the spare key I kept hidden on my ring, calling out their names. But the grand house felt completely quiet. Assuming they were running errands, I left the warm pie on their sprawling marble kitchen island and headed back toward the front door. I was halfway down their long, winding paver driveway when I realized my heavy leather purse was not on my shoulder. I had absent-mindedly set it down on the kitchen bar stool while arranging the pie box. I turned around and walked quietly back to the front door. The heavy rain was coming down hard, completely masking the sound of my footsteps on the porch. As I pushed the heavy wooden front door open, I heard voices coming from the sunken living room. DeAndre and Chloe had apparently come downstairs from the master bedroom. I stopped dead in my tracks in the dark foyer. The arrogant, greedy tone of their voices made the breath catch violently in my throat. They were not talking like a loving couple concerned about the well-being of an aging mother. They were laughing. It was a loud, cruel, wicked laughter that bounced off their expensive high ceilings. The signature was honestly so easy to forge. Chloe was bragging her high-pitched voice, grating terribly against my ears. I just traced it a few times from that old birthday card she gave us last year. The notary at my friend's real estate office did not even ask any questions. He just stamped the power of attorney right then and there because I batted my eyelashes. I felt my knees go weak and my vision blur, but I locked my legs and leaned heavily against the cold, painted wall of the hallway. Power of attorney. My own daughter-in-law had forged a highly sensitive legal document to take total, unauthorized control of my life. And my son, the boy I carried in my womb and raised with absolute devotion, was cheering her on. I cannot believe it actually worked so perfectly. DeAndre chuckled, the sound making my stomach churn with pure disgust. The bank accepted the paperwork without making a single verification phone call. Do you realize what this means, Chloe? We just moved $80,000 right out of her primary retirement account this morning. The mortgage arrears are completely caught up, and the contractor for the new luxury pool deck is paid in full. I closed my eyes as a massive wave of pure nausea hit me. $80,000. That was money I had saved by skipping vacations, wearing the same worn-out shoes for years, and working late into the night grading papers. That was money I built up dollar by dollar, so I would never ever be a financial burden to anyone in my old age. They had brazenly stolen it to pay for their absurdly luxurious lifestyle. They stole my lifelong security to pay for a backyard swimming pool. Then Chloe spoke again, and her venomous words were like a physical blow to the chest. We just need to keep playing the game for a few more months, she said, casually sipping what sounded like a glass of wine. We will keep telling everyone at church and the neighbors that her mind is rapidly going. By December, we can move her into that Shady Pines facility on the dirty edge of town. The state minimum facility is incredibly cheap, and once she is legally locked in there, we can completely liquidate the rest of the investment accounts. She is just a silly old woman, DeAndre. She does not know what day of the week it is half the time. She will probably just smile and thank us for taking care of her. DeAndre laughed again. A deep, booming, sinister laugh. You are an absolute genius, babe, he told her affectionately. We will have the whole estate cleared out and transferred to our names before she even realizes what hit her. I stood frozen in that dark hallway, listening to my own flesh and blood plot my complete demise. They truly thought I was a silly old woman. They thought I was a frail, confused burden who would just quietly fade away into a cheap state-run nursing home while they lived like absolute royalty on the fruits of my hard labor. They thought I would lay down and let them strip me of my dignity. Any other mother might have completely broken down right there in the shadows. Any other woman might have burst into that living room crying and screaming, demanding to know where she went wrong raising her only child. But I did not shed a single tear. I did not make a single sound. 40 years working as a school administrator, handling severe crises, breaking up fights, and managing impossible situations had taught me one vital, undeniable lesson. You never react when you are highly emotional. You only react when you have secured the absolute upper hand. The sadness and heartbreak completely evaporated from my body, leaving absolutely nothing behind but a cold, calculated, and righteous rage. I heard the heavy sliding glass door open and close. DeAndre and Chloe had stepped out onto the covered back patio to admire the rain hitting the new pool my stolen money was currently paying for. This was my only window of opportunity. I slipped off my wet shoes to avoid making any noise and moved silently across the expensive hardwood floor, straight toward DeAndre's home office. I knew my son better than anyone. He was incredibly arrogant, but he was also remarkably lazy. If they had forged highly illegal documents, he would not have bothered hiding them in a secure safe. He would be far too confident that his senile mother would never dare snoop through his important things. I opened the heavy oak door of his office and went straight for his sleek, modern filing cabinet. Just as I suspected, it was completely unlocked. My hands were as steady as a trained surgeon as I pulled out a thick, overstuffed manila folder labeled Financials. I opened it and quickly spread the papers across his glass desk. There it was, staring me right in the face. The forged power of attorney document. Chloe had done a decent job mimicking my cursive loops, but it lacked the firm, heavy pressure I always applied to the paper. I quickly took my cell phone from my jacket pocket and snapped high-quality, clear photos of every single page, making sure the notary stamp was visible. But as I dug deeper into the disorganized folder, my burning anger shifted into profound disbelief. I found the recent loan modification documents for their massive luxury house. I read the fine print carefully, using the sharp financial literacy I had honed over decades of quiet investing. They had not just stolen $80,000 in liquid cash. They had been spectacularly reckless and greedy. In their desperate rush to secure a lower interest rate and consolidate their massive mounting credit card debts, they had completely restructured their mortgage. And to achieve this, they had used the forged power of attorney to list my pristine credit history and my substantial secret investment portfolios as direct collateral. They had illegally tied their entire financial existence to my name. They had bet their massive house, their expensive cars, and their entire future on the foolish assumption that I would be locked away in a nursing home, unable to ever fight back. I stood in that dim, quiet office, holding the very documents that proved their ultimate stupidity. They thought they had successfully backed me into a corner. They thought they had trapped me in a web of elder abuse, but by tying their massive underwater debt directly to my assets, they had unknowingly handed me the golden keys to their complete destruction. If they defaulted on anything, the bank would technically come for my money. But because the documents were blatantly forged, it meant they had committed massive federal wire and bank fraud. And because they foolishly used my assets as their collateral, it meant I now had the supreme legal leverage to absolutely ruin them and take their home. I carefully placed the papers back into the folder exactly how I found them. I closed the filing cabinet, grabbed my purse from the kitchen stool, and slipped out the front door back into the pouring rain. I drove back to my modest home in complete silence. The heavy rain beat against my windshield, matching the fierce pounding of my heart. They wanted to treat me like a silly old woman. They wanted to steal my life's work and throw me away like useless trash. But they forgot exactly who raised them. They forgot who built the silent empire they were currently trying to steal. I was not going to cry over a son who saw his mother as a disposable ATM machine. I was going to use every single ounce of my hidden wealth and my sharp mind to dismantle their fake lives brick by brick. The war had officially begun, and I was going to make sure they lost absolutely everything. I stepped back into the house that afternoon with a heavy heart, but my mind was clearer than it had ever been. I knew I had to commit completely to this performance. If they wanted a senile old woman, I would give them one. I started leaving my reading glasses in the refrigerator and pretending I could not remember the names of my own neighbors. I would stare blankly at the wall for minutes at a time, while DeAndre and Chloe whispered just out of earshot, thinking I was too far gone to notice. Every time Chloe would raise her voice to speak to me, I would flinch and pull my shoulders up to my ears, looking exactly like the scared, frail woman she desperately wanted me to be. It was humiliating to play the part of a fool, but every single day was a strategic victory. When they thought I was napping, I was actually busy. I found excuses to slip out of the house, telling them I was going to the corner store to buy stamps. In reality, I was meeting with my lawyer and the regional bank manager. These were men who had known me for years. They remembered the woman who had managed the finances for a massive school district and navigated complex state budgets. When I walked into their offices, I did not act like the woman who lived in that house. I sat straight, pulled out my high-quality notebook, and demanded action. I had already documented every single instance of the mail tampering and identified the exact dates Chloe had used my stolen debit card at luxury clothing boutiques. My lawyer was meticulous. He gathered every piece of evidence from the surveillance footage at the stores where she had shopped with my money to the timestamps on the digital banking records. I had everything I needed to destroy their little game. The regional bank manager, a man who respected the discipline I had shown in my investments for decades, looked at me with deep concern. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I have never seen such a blatant case of elder financial abuse. Do not worry, we have everything ready to protect your interests." The bank was already on my side. They knew who I was, and they knew the assets I held. I watched as they compiled the files that would serve as the nails in DeAndre and Chloe's coffin. Every signature they forged was now a documented crime. Every cent they siphoned away was now a piece of evidence. I walked back to my car, put my scarf back on, and practiced my confused, wide-eyed look. I was ready to go home and play the part of the victim one last time. The true scope of my counterattack went far beyond the little cash they had stolen from my checking account. While DeAndre was busy laughing about his imaginary victory, I was moving through the world like a shadow with a massive financial arsenal. For 40 years, I had not just been saving, I had been building a fortress. I contacted the international firms that held my husband's legacy, the silent investments that had grown quietly in the dark for nearly half a century. I accessed my offshore accounts and the complex trusts that even my husband had structured to remain untouchable. I realized I was worth millions, a reality that made their petty theft of $80,000 look like a child stealing a candy bar. I moved with precision, shifting these massive assets into accounts that DeAndre could never reach. He had no clue that he was trying to rob a woman who could buy and sell his lifestyle 10 times over. The bank manager and I worked in perfect synchronization. I instructed them to freeze the specific accounts DeAndre had compromised, but to do it slowly, subtly, so he would think it was just a technical glitch or a lack of funds, not a deliberate security lockdown. But phase 2 was the masterpiece. Through a local shell corporation I had established years ago for property management, I quietly began to purchase the mortgage debt on DeAndre and Chloe's house. I had seen them brag about their fancy swimming pool and their expensive home, but I knew the numbers. They were drowning in debt and were only one missed paycheck away from total collapse. By the time I was finished, I had effectively become their primary lien holder. I was not just their mother. I was their landlord and their sole creditor. They were living in a house they thought they owned, but every brick, every window, and every tile in that pool now technically belonged to me. I sat in my suite at the Grand Imperial Hotel, reviewing the final contracts. It was a beautiful, cold, and efficient kind of justice. They wanted to see me out on the street, begging for scraps in a nursing home while they sat in comfort. They had absolutely no idea that I held the keys to their front door. They were celebrating their supposed wealth, while I held the power to evict them with a single stroke of a pen. Everything was finally aligned for the endgame. I sat at my hotel desk, took a deep breath, and dialed DeAndre's number. I practiced the tremor in my voice, the exact pitch of an old woman who was finally ready to throw in the towel. The phone rang 3 times before he answered, his voice dripping with forced patience. "Mum, I have told you not to wander off. Are you okay?" I let a ragged, tearful sob escape my lips. "Oh, DeAndre, I'm just so tired. I can't do this anymore. I'm confused. I'm scared. And I think you were right all along." There was a long pause on his end. I could practically hear him grinning. The greed was so thick I could smell it through the receiver. "I'm ready to give up, son," I continued, sniffling loudly. "I want to sign everything over to you and Eleanor. Let's just go to the bank, settle the estate, and put me in that place you picked out. I just want the peace of mind knowing you're taking care of me." DeAndre's voice changed instantly. It lost all that fake irritation and became smooth, urgent, and vibrating with excitement. "Mum, you are making the smartest decision of your life. Don't go anywhere. I will be there to pick you up in an hour. We can handle everything at the bank together. Just stay exactly where you are." I hung up the phone and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were clear and burning with resolve. I wiped the fake tears from my cheeks, grabbed my folder of documents, and stood up tall. They were going to sprint to the bank, believing they had finally won the final prize. They would sign the papers, celebrate their total victory, and then in the blink of an eye, the floor would drop out from underneath them. I was about to teach my family the most expensive lesson of their entire lives. The trap was sprung, and there was absolutely no escape. I checked my watch. The time for justice had finally arrived. The bank was quiet, smelling of polished wood and cold marble. DeAndre and Chloe walked in with the swagger of people who believed they had already won the lottery. They didn't even look at me. They walked straight to the manager's office, like they owned the place. I followed behind them, shrinking my shoulders and keeping my head down, playing the part of the confused, aging mother who didn't know what was happening. We sat down at the mahogany table, and I deliberately fumbled with my purse, acting as if I couldn't find the pen. DeAndre sighed loudly, rolling his eyes at the manager as if I were a difficult toddler. "Just sign the papers, Mum," he said, his voice dripping with false patience. "We just need you to authorize the transfer so you can get the care you need at that nice facility." Chloe chimed in, smiling at me with those cold, empty eyes. "It is for your own good, Loretta. You know how hard it is for you to keep track of things." I kept my head down, letting out a soft, shaky breath. I slowly pushed my chair back, then stood up. But instead of fumbling for the pen, I took a deep, steadying breath. I stood tall, my shoulders squared, and I looked at them with a gaze that had suddenly turned sharp as a razor. The confusion vanished from my eyes, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I slid a thick, heavy folder across the polished desk. The manager, a man who had known me for years and respected my financial mind, opened the folder without hesitation. DeAndre looked at me, his smile faltering as he sensed the sudden shift in the air. "What are you doing, Mom?" he asked, his voice losing its confident edge. I didn't answer him. I just sat back, crossed my arms, and watched. The manager cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the documents inside the folder. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice perfectly professional, but laced with a stern authority. "Before we proceed with any signatures, I have to inform you that all accounts associated with Mrs. Caldwell have been under federal fraud investigation for the past week." DeAndre's smug face turned pale, his mouth slightly agape. "Fraud? What are you talking about?" he stammered. Chloe's hand went to her throat, her face draining of all color. The manager pointed to the documents in the folder. "We have processed the reports regarding the forged power of attorney and the unauthorized transfers. Your access to these accounts has been frozen indefinitely by the bank's legal department. You are officially under investigation for bank and wire fraud." The room seemed to shrink around them. DeAndre tried to reach for the papers, but the manager pulled them back. "I am not finished, sir." The manager continued, his tone turning icy. Mrs. Caldwell has also authorized us to provide these records to the authorities. You aren't just here to sign papers. You are here because the evidence of your crimes has finally caught up with you. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised to be an honorable man, and I felt nothing but a cold, distant pity. He looked small, pathetic, and utterly terrified. But I was far from done. I leaned forward, my voice low, steady, and devoid of any maternal warmth. You thought I was a silly old woman who didn't know the difference between a savings account and a swindle. You thought you could strip me of my legacy while I sat there nodding at your dinner table. You made the mistake of thinking my kindness was a weakness you could exploit. The final blow came when I spoke of the house. You didn't just steal my cash, DeAndre. You were so greedy that you tied your own house to my name as collateral for your reckless debts. You used my credit and my assets to gamble on a lifestyle you couldn't afford. And because you defaulted on those loans using stolen funds, I decided it was time to collect. My shell corporation now holds the deed to your house. I am officially your landlord, and your debt is due in full. Chloe began to scream. Her face twisted in pure, unadulterated panic. She turned on DeAndre, her fingers clawing at the air as she shouted that he had ruined her life, that he had dragged her into his stupidity. She was not the loving, supportive wife anymore. She was a cornered animal, realizing her luxury was gone. I watched them tear each other apart, listening to their excuses, their accusations, and their pathetic pleas for mercy. It was the most satisfying moment of my entire life. I stood up, smoothing out my jacket, and looked at them one last time. There is no agreement to be made. There is no family to return to. The police are waiting in the lobby to walk you out in handcuffs, and the foreclosure notice for your home is already being served. I walked out of that office with my head held high, leaving them behind to face the crushing reality of their own greed. I stepped out of the bank and into the bright afternoon sun, feeling the weight of the last few years lift entirely from my shoulders. I was free, I was secure, and for the first time I was truly alone by my own choice, not theirs. Life is a long game, and no one should ever mistake a mother's silence for ignorance. If you enjoyed this story of justice being served, please like, subscribe, and share. Leave a comment and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I want to know how far this story of truth has reached. Stay strong and always remember to guard your own peace. I am sitting here on the porch of my beautiful beach house, listening to the gentle rhythm of the waves crashing against the sand. It is a world away from the cold, dark hallway of that hospital and the suffocating stress of my previous life. People often ask me if I feel bitterness toward my son for the betrayal that nearly destroyed me. I tell them honestly that I feel only a profound and permanent peace. The pain of a mother's betrayal is a unique kind of agony, but I have learned that your own dignity is worth infinitely more than any blood connection. No one should ever be allowed to diminish your spirit or discard your hard work as if you were disposable. I want every single one of you to hear this loud and clear. Never let anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, mistake your kindness for weakness. It is your strength, your wisdom, and your boundaries that define you. If you liked my story and want to hear more journeys of resilience, please make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? Stay strong, Queens.